If anyone had told me back when I was an 8-year-old girl stepping off that plane in Germany that I would one day walk the catwalk, wear the most beautiful clothes, be admired by men, and even find love, I would have laughed, or maybe cried. Back then, I couldn't imagine a future like that. All I knew was that I was different, and different had always meant rejection. In my village, my pale skin, white hair, and light eyes had been treated like a mark of shame. They whispered behind my back, avoided my gaze, and even claimed I was cursed, and this led to my being ejected from the village. But in Berlin, different meant something else entirely. It meant admiration. It meant intrigue and positive curiosity. People didn't turn away, they turned toward me. Their stares weren't filled with judgment or fear, but with fascination. I could see it in their eyes, a spark of interest that made me feel for the first time as though my uniqueness might actually be a gift. Berlin wasn't just a city, it was a new world, one that seemed to welcome me with open arms. But let's retrace our steps to the airport, where a little 8-year-old girl with albinism stepped into her new world. As I stepped off the plane and into the bright, bustling terminal of Berlin Airport, I felt a wave of excitement ripple through me. Everything around me seemed so big, so shiny, and so full of life. The towering glass walls let in beams of sunlight, and the noise of people chatting in different languages filled the air like music. I couldn't help but smile. My cheeks felt like they might burst from how wide I was grinning. Holding onto the hands of my foster parents, I felt safe, but also ready to explore. I clutched their fingers tightly, not because I was scared, but because I wanted to share this amazing moment with them. Every little thing caught my attention. The big glowing screens showing flight numbers, the luggage carts zipping past, and the shiny floors that reflected the lights above like mirrors. This wasn't just an airport to me. It felt like stepping into a whole new world. Everything seemed to glow, and I felt like I was glowing too. This was the start of something incredible, and I was ready for it all. It felt surreal to think that not long ago I was still in my home country in Africa. Life had changed so dramatically since then. When we arrived in Germany, my parents decided to homeschool me at first, giving me time to adjust and learn so many new things. It wasn't long before I was ready to join a school. I sailed through elementary school with ease, thriving in the new environment. Even as a child, I could sense a deep determination within me, a drive to succeed. Looking back, I realized how fortunate I was. My parents loved me unconditionally and did everything to ensure my well-being. They even took me for specialized medical treatments that transformed my skin and body into a healthier, vibrant condition. My parents also solved for me the puzzle of why they chose me out of all the beautiful children in the foster home. They revealed to me that their daughter, who was only 9 years old, had died of skin cancer. In my terrible state back then, I actually reminded them of her. In me, they say their daughter. God truly works in mysterious ways. Slowly, the memories of my village back home began to fade. I chose to let them go. Time flew by, and before I knew it, I was a teenager. I made a firm decision. I would never return to my country. Why would I? It was a place where I had never felt loved, a place where I had never truly belonged. Back in Africa, I was different, an outsider among my own people. But here, in this country, I was one of them. My skin was as white as theirs, and for the first time in my life, I felt accepted. I finally belonged. And for the first time, I was truly, undeniably happy. As if life hadn't already blessed me enough, a few years later, I met Fab. Fab and I crossed paths at the university where I was pursuing my dream of becoming a lawyer. From the moment we met, there was a connection that felt effortless, as if fate had quietly nudged us together. We shared long conversations, laughed at our shared quirks, and discovered a shared passion for justice. My mission in life had become crystal clear: to stand up for those who face discrimination in any form. I believed, with every fiber of my being, that differences in people were not flaws to be criticized, but gifts to be celebrated. Diversity was not a problem. It was the essence of humanity's beauty. It was during one of those quiet, reflective moments that I fully understood a lesson my mother had often shared with me, one she called the pot and the ladle. She used to say, "A pot and a ladle may seem mismatched, but they are a perfect pair. They serve different purposes, but each relies on the other to function." I finally grasped the wisdom of her words. Life was exactly like that, a blend of unique roles and distinct people. Each of us has a part to play, no matter how different we may seem. Some of us are pots, solid and steady, while others are ladles, flexible and resourceful. Fab and I often talked about this analogy. He, too, shared a profound respect for life's diversity and supported my ambition to fight for equality. Together, we envisioned a future where no one would be judged by their differences, but rather appreciated for what made them unique. The endless possibilities in Berlin contrasted sharply with the dusty roads and wary gazes of my childhood. In this city, my albinism wasn't a curse. My unique beauty opened doors I never imagined possible. I attracted fashion houses who thought I was the best thing they ever found. I got modeling gigs, standing in front of flashing cameras, draped in designer clothes. My image actually graced a few magazines. Under the bright lights, I felt a confidence that I never knew was within me, as if I was stepping into a life that once seemed reserved for someone else. But the glamour of modeling was only a part of my journey, not its purpose. My real passion lay in my studies. At university, I threw myself into law, fueled by a desire to bring about change and to fight for justice. I know what it's like to be overlooked, misunderstood, and cast aside. Berlin gave me so much, but I always thought that maybe one day I'd return home. Not as the cursed girl they cast away, but as a woman empowered, ready to stand tall and advocate for others like me. It was not too long before I was graduating. As I stood on the ground of this prestigious university in Berlin, my heart felt like it might burst from the sheer joy and disbelief of the moment. The sound of applause echoed around me, but it felt distant, almost surreal. I clutched my graduation certificate tightly, unable to stop the tears that threatened to spill. This moment, me, an African girl with albinism, graduating from a prestigious university, felt like a dream I had never dared to fully believe in. I thought of the dusty paths of my village, where I had once been mocked and shunned, and how far I had come. Berlin had been overwhelming at first, with its bustling streets and the weight of academic challenges, but I had faced it all one step at a time. I remembered the nights of doubt, the moments when I felt like giving up, and the faces of my foster parents who had believed in me when I couldn't. Now, standing here in my cap and gown, I felt a swell of pride. I had done it. I had turned the impossible into reality, and for the first time, I truly believed in my own strength. As I moved forward, my purpose became clearer with every step. The world was made of contrasts, different cultures, different experiences, different people. And that's what made it extraordinary. This realization finally helped me truly appreciate who I was. For the first time, I embraced my identity in its entirety. I was an African living with albinism, and I came to understand that this was no accident. There was a purpose to my existence, something only I, as an African with albinism, could achieve. Who better than me to speak about the experience of being different? Who better to give a voice to those who felt invisible, unworthy, or misunderstood simply because they didn't fit neatly into society's narrow definitions? I was different from everyone else. I was neither black nor white. And yet, I was both. I embodied a unique duality, carrying within me the essence of two worlds. My skin reflected one narrative, while my heritage and soul reflected another. This complex identity, which once made me feel isolated, now became my strength. The more I thought about it, the more I saw myself as a masterpiece of the Creator. Each detail of my existence, from my pale skin to my African roots, had been intentionally crafted. I wasn't a mistake or an anomaly. I was a testament to the boundless creativity of life, a living example of how beauty can emerge in the most unexpected forms. It was also at this time that I was receiving endless attention from all kinds of men. I could not believe that I, who was the most insecure person in the world because of my albinism, had become a woman that turned heads wherever I went. But I never let this move my focus from my goals, and after all, I had Fab. Dating Fab was a whirlwind of excitement and adventure. He was unlike anyone I had ever met, and perhaps that's exactly why I fell so deeply in love with him. Fab had a zest for life that was infectious, a boundless energy and curiosity that made everything feel new and thrilling. He loved the world and all the unique experiences it had to offer. One of the things I admired most about him was his passion for exploring the unfamiliar. He had an unshakable fascination with anything different, anything out of the ordinary. Together, we embarked on a series of adventures that transformed my view of the world. Fab had a knack for finding the most unusual restaurants, and he was always eager to try foods from every corner of the globe. Whether it was spicy Indian curries, fragrant Ethiopian stews, or delicate Japanese sushi, he dove into every meal with enthusiasm. Sometimes the dishes were a hit, and other times, well, they were a lesson in boldness. But that was the magic of it all. Every experience with him felt like a small, delightful discovery. He didn't just tolerate my differences, he celebrated them. Fab saw in me what so many others had overlooked, my uniqueness, my individuality. He made me feel not just accepted but truly cherished for who I was. And in return, I loved him for his adventurous spirit, his open heart, and his ability to see beauty in the unconventional. I knew deep down that part of what drew him to me was my own distinctiveness. To Fab, being different wasn't a drawback, it was a gift, and in his eyes, I was a treasure, someone who stood apart in a world that often tried to force everyone into sameness. With him, I didn't just feel loved, I felt celebrated, and as much as I appreciated his unique personality, I knew he saw me the same way, a beautiful blend of contrasts, someone who had her own special place in his ever-curious heart. Together, we were a perfect pair, each bringing something extraordinary to the other's world. After graduation, it didn't take too long to get a job. Landing a job at a prestigious law firm in Berlin felt like the ultimate validation of my journey. On my first day, I walked through the sleek glass doors of the firm, my reflection staring back at me, confident yet slightly anxious. The receptionist greeted me warmly, and I could feel curious eyes subtly glancing my way as I made my way to my new office. I was used to standing out, but this time it felt different. My albinism wasn't a source of judgment or pity here. It seemed to intrigue and command respect. The office was a flurry of activity, with colleagues from all over the world collaborating on cases that felt larger than life. I quickly noticed how diverse and dynamic the environment was, and though I was the only African woman, let alone one with albinism, I felt welcomed. My team was kind and professional, and my supervisor went out of their way to ensure I felt comfortable. As I settled into my role, drafting legal documents and attending meetings, I began to notice something incredible. My differences were no longer seen as barriers, but as assets. My perspective, shaped by my unique experiences, brought something new to the table. People sought my input, not out of politeness, but because they truly valued it. For the first time, I felt seen for my capabilities rather than my appearance. Every case I worked on, every client I interacted with, reminded me of how far I'd come, from a girl dismissed and underestimated in her village to a respected professional in a Berlin law firm. It was exhilarating and empowering, and as I left the office each day, I couldn't help but smile, knowing I was rewriting not just my own story, but the narrative for others like me. And it goes without saying that Fab was my biggest cheerleader. He and my parents were as excited about my progress as I was. And then, on a crisp spring evening in Berlin, the kind where the air feels alive with possibility, that Fab had invited me out to dinner at our favorite little Italian restaurant. He seemed more animated than usual, his brown eyes sparkling with an excitement I couldn't quite place. "You know," he began, his voice steady but filled with emotion, "since the day I met you, you've shown me what strength, grace, and resilience look like. You've taught me so much about love, not just in how you love others, but in how you've learned to love yourself." Before I could respond, he dropped to one knee. My heart stopped as I realized what was happening. From his pocket, he pulled out a small velvet box and opened it to reveal a delicate gold ring with a single sparkling diamond. "Akumu," he said, his voice breaking slightly, "will you do me the honor of being my wife? I want to spend the rest of my life learning from you, loving you, and walking this journey together." Tears filled my eyes as I nodded, unable to speak at first. Finally, I managed to say, "Yes, of course, yes." Our wedding day was intimate yet perfect, held in a small, charming church tucked away in a quiet corner of Berlin. The stained glass windows cast colourful beams of light across the room, creating a magical atmosphere that felt almost surreal. I wore a simple yet elegant white dress that flowed gently as I walked, my wavy white hair cascading down my back like a shimmering veil. Fab looked dashing in his classic black suit, his smile as bright as the sun streaming through the windows. Our parents sat in the front pews, their faces glowing with joy, while a few close friends filled the modest space with warmth and laughter. The vows we exchanged were heartfelt and deeply personal, promising love and respect for each other through all of life's ups and downs. When we stepped out of the church as husband and wife, a light drizzle began to fall, as if the heavens were blessing our union. Life with Fab was amazing. He was the perfect husband. I was settling into my new world, feeling more comfortable by the day. But then something happened. I became pregnant. The news from the doctor sent me sitting bolt upright in my chair as I considered the implications. Was there a possibility of bearing a black child? After doing some research, I realized that there was indeed a possibility of giving birth to a black child. The thought lingered, and I couldn't shake it. What if I gave birth to a black baby? Everyone I considered family was white. Both my foster parents and Fab's parents were white. To the outside world, I appeared to be white as well. What would happen to my child? Would they face the same struggles I did as a child, but with the roles reversed? That was when I started thinking about going back to my home country. My child was not going to keep wondering why he looked different. I couldn't bear it if he went through what I went through. I wasn't going to wait for time or chance to take him to Africa. I would take him there myself. I would introduce him to his fellow Africans. I needed to give him the opportunity to understand who he was and learn to appreciate himself. I didn't want to have to ease his pain with the story of a pot and a ladle, a tale he would never quite understand. I had to meet my people before my child, who I believed to be a boy, was born. I knew my mother loved me at the time, even though it was still a mystery why she abandoned me. I would need her to explain that to me. Then I would be able to point out to my son his roots and tell him why he was black, if that was how the Creator chose to make him. And oh, how I dreamed of my son. He was a constant presence in my mind, appearing vividly in my dreams every single night. It was as if my heart and soul were already preparing for his arrival, crafting a vision of who he would be. In my dreams, he was a bright light, full of life and promise. I imagined his laughter ringing through the air, a sound so pure and joyful that it filled every corner of my being. I saw his little hands reaching out to explore the world with endless curiosity, his wide, innocent eyes taking in the beauty and wonder of life. I saw his smile so warm and radiant, and imagined how it would light up the darkest of days. I envisioned his spirit, strong, kind, and fearless, ready to take on the world. He was my dream of the future, the person who would carry forward everything I held dear. Every time I woke from these dreams, my heart swelled with anticipation and love. Though he was not yet in my arms, he already lived in my heart. I could feel his presence so vividly that it was as if he were already with me, guiding my thoughts and inspiring my days. He was my dream, my muse, my reason to believe in the magic of tomorrow, and I couldn't wait to meet him, to hold him, and to bring those dreams to life. I began to make arrangements for my visit to Kenya. I knew the name of the children's home I had been adopted from, and I promptly reached out to them to make contact. As I reflected on my roots, I also remembered that Kagera was the small village I had come from, tucked away in the serene landscape of the region. I knew I had to return there, to reconnect with the land of my birth, to truly understand my heritage. When I shared my plans with the director of the children's home, she was thrilled. She immediately expressed her support and even invited me to visit the home in person. Her excitement was palpable, and she eagerly offered to arrange someone to help me find my way to Kagera village. She seemed determined to help me reconnect with my past, and her enthusiasm made me feel that this journey was destined to be. And so Fab and I travelled to Kenya. And finally, at last, here I was in Kagera village, right inside my mother's humble hut. My mother moved some paces back so that she could take a better look at me. "Is this really you, Akumu? You have grown so beautiful. You look just like a real European," she said. "Do you really think so, Mother?" I asked, smiling at her. "Where are my brothers and sisters?" I asked quickly. "I think you know that your father passed away a few years back," she said. "As for your brothers and sisters, they are scattered all over. Your 2 brothers went to look for jobs in Kisumu town while your 2 sisters married in the neighboring villages. I have been left all alone," she said, looking down. She was having a big problem looking me in the eye, and I knew why. "Sit down," she said, showing me a tiny stool opposite where she was still standing. We both sat down, and the question I longed to ask her popped out. "Why did you abandon me on that day? I know you loved me, Mother," I said, looking her straight in the eye. "Akumu, I don't know if you can understand this, but I did it to save your life. They were going to kill you," she said. "Who?" I asked. "The elders," she said. "Didn't you recognize Gweno, the old man that brought you here? He was one of them." No wonder he looked familiar, I thought. I had to plead with your father to allow me to carry out my plan. I knew that God would somehow take care of you in that big city. It was better than to see you thrown in the middle of the lake, she said, tears flowing down her wrinkled cheeks. I shivered at the thought, but I knew she was telling me the truth. "They said you were the reason the lake was drying up," she said. "After I returned from the city, they said that I had made a big mistake. They said that as long as you were alive, our village would continue to suffer. According to them, you were born to be sacrificed," my mother said, her gaze on the wall. Just as my mother completed the sentence, we heard what sounded like a stampede outside the hut, then the war cries followed by the wailing of women. It reminded me of the time a certain man had died in the village, and there was a big feast where a bull was slaughtered and the villagers danced and wailed all night long. "What is that, Mother?" I asked her, confused. "I don't know," she said, walking slowly to the door. She pushed, but it could not open. She pushed harder, opening it slightly, and that was when we saw the big stone that had been placed to stop the door. "What is the meaning of this?" I asked my mother in a panic. The noise outside continued. "The gods brought her back to us. The gods have not forgotten Kagera village," Gweno was shouting. "That is Gweno's voice," my mother said, shaking. After a few minutes, the little hut started filling with smoke. It finally dawned on me what was happening. They must have set the hut on fire. They were determined to kill me. My mother was screaming and wailing, but she only managed to join the wailing that was going on outside. In desperation, I looked around the house, but there was no other exit. Then I spotted something. The pot was right at the corner of the hut, and it had a ladle inside it. I would die with what I believed in. I went and grabbed the pot and ladle, and clutching it tightly, I squeezed myself next to my mother, who had collapsed next to the stool she was sitting on earlier. Smoke was filling the hut very fast, and breathing became almost impossible. As I passed out, I heard my mother's words. "I am sorry, Akumu. I am sorry for bringing you into this world." Unknown to my mother and I, the loud wailing and the smoke had caught Fab's attention, and he had rushed to find out what was happening. On arrival at the scene, he was blocked by a large crowd of youths carrying sticks and stones. They had been assigned to stand guard. Looking at the hut that was on fire, Fab quickly gathered what was happening. He tried to fight his way to the hut, but the youths wouldn't let him. That was when he drew his gun. Fab never went anywhere without a gun. He shot into the air twice, sending everyone scampering to safety. The villagers were wise enough to know that they could not stand against this kind of weapon. Pushing the big stone aside, Fab pushed his way into the hut. I was lying next to my mother, clutching tight to the pot. Fighting the flames that were about to envelop us, he grabbed us by our legs and pulled us both out of the burning hut. Omondi, the guide that had brought us to Kagera village, finally gathered the courage to come and help Fab. The 2 men got both me and my mother into the Range Rover and rushed us to the hospital. I was in the hospital for a week, slowly regaining consciousness after the harrowing ordeal in Kagera village. The pain from the burns was overwhelming, but it was the terror of what had happened that lingered in my mind. The villagers had set fire to the hut, where my mother and I had just begun to talk. Their anger and fear had driven them to commit such a horrific act, believing that destroying me would rid them of whatever curse they thought I brought upon them. I was pregnant, and all I could think of as I lay in that hospital bed, broken and battered, was whether my baby had survived. With all the smoke I had inhaled, I feared the worst, that I had lost my child in the inferno. But deep down, a part of me clung to hope, praying that my baby had somehow made it through. And then there was my mother. What had become of her? She had been in the hut with me, and I could not imagine her gone. The flames had encroached close, and I hoped desperately that she had survived. The villagers' wrath had been aimed at me, but I couldn't bear the thought of her losing her life. I couldn't bear losing her. When I finally regained full consciousness, the relief that washed over me when I learned that both my baby and my mother were alive and well was indescribable. Against all odds, we had all survived the fire, thanks to Fab's quick action, and above all, I thanked God, for this was indeed a miracle. Now, as I lay there recovering from the internal damage, I knew that the journey ahead would be difficult, but the most important thing was that we had survived, and I was determined to rebuild, to protect my child. We were alive, and for that, I was grateful. I opened my eyes and struggled to sit up, and there was Fab's loving face. I was later introduced to one of my sisters who had come to see me at the hospital. I hardly recognized her. A few days later, I was finally strong enough to visit my mother, who was recovering in a different room in the same hospital. The moment I saw her, my heart swelled with joy and relief. It was such a comfort to see her, and I could tell she felt the same way. Fab, ever thoughtful and practical, proposed that we bring her to Germany with us so she could be closer and well cared for. But my mother, with her characteristic determination, refused the offer. She was adamant about staying in Kenya, close to the life she knew. After some discussion, we came up with a plan that seemed like the perfect solution. We decided to rent a house for her in Nairobi, where she could live comfortably with my sister. My sister, a widow struggling to make ends meet, was living in deep poverty at the time. The idea of moving to Nairobi to live with our mother brought a sense of hope and excitement to her. The plan gave me peace of mind, knowing that my mother and sister would have each other, and that I would have a home in Kenya. I sat by the window seat of the plane, gazing outside as the world below transformed into a miniature landscape. The buildings, roads, and rolling hills seemed to shrink with every passing second as the plane climbed higher and higher into the sky. Though my visit to Kagera village had been horrendous, I felt no regret about coming back to my home country. Most importantly, it had reconnected me with my mother in a way I never imagined possible. As the plane soared above the clouds, I thought about the promises we had made. Fab and I had vowed to make regular trips to Kenya to visit her. We had also committed to sending financial support to ensure her comfort and well-being. And I had made her a promise that filled my heart with joy and anticipation. I would bring my baby to meet her as soon as he was born. It would have been easy, perhaps even tempting, to let go of my African heritage. But I wasn't going to do that. I didn't want to forget the part of me that was shaped by the red earth of my homeland. Yet, as I looked down at my hands, at the pale skin that told a different story, I couldn't help but reflect on the complexity of my identity. Am I black or am I white? The question lingered for a moment, but then with a quiet smile, I knew the answer. I was, without a doubt, a masterpiece of his making. As these thoughts swirled in my mind, a sense of peace washed over me. Leaning my head on Fab's shoulder, I allowed myself to drift into sleep, comforted by the knowledge of who I was and the journey that lay ahead. The plane finally landed in Berlin airport. Hand in hand, Fab and I walked silently towards the cab that was waiting to pick us up. I may have been silent, but my mind was alive. The village that rejected me, that saw me as a curse, had tried to end my life, but they hadn't succeeded. They couldn't erase my past or my spirit. I had returned to Kagera for answers, for closure, and even though the journey had been filled with unimaginable suffering, I didn't regret it. The fire had been a stark reminder of the fear and ignorance that had driven the villagers to take such drastic action against me. Yet, through all the hatred they had shown, I had discovered something far more powerful than the cruelty of their actions, the deep, unbreakable bond I shared with my mother. Despite everything, I had reconnected with her, and that was a gift I never expected. I had found it in myself to forgive her. She had made choices that hurt me, choices that I could never fully understand. But I knew now that they were born from her own pain, fear, and her love for me. The villagers may have thought they could destroy me, but they had only made me stronger. I didn't need their acceptance anymore. What mattered was that I had reclaimed my identity, had found my roots, for me and my unborn child. I left Kenya with no desire for vengeance, no thirst for justice. What had been done was done. I was a woman strong and whole with a future ahead of me, free to live and love without fear. As I bring this story to a close, I want to introduce you to a precious part of our journey, the baby I brought into this world. Meet Anthony Fabian Ateco, our beautiful, handsome baby boy. He is the light of our lives, a perfect blend of love and dreams come true.